Joining us now at the World Deciphered is Ralph Goff. Ralph is a Cipher Brief Expert. He is also former senior CIA officer and six-time station chief. Ralph, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure, Suzanne. Always great to be here with the Cipher Brief.
You know, Israel has said no to a ceasefire proposal that was put forward by both the U.S. and France, and has told its military now to be ready for a ground invasion. Experts are warning, and have been warning for quite a while now, of the dangers of a two-front war. So, Ralph, I want to know, what do you think that this could mean realistically for the region if Israel moves forward with a ground invasion?
So, Suzanne, I have to tell you, I don't think there's ever been a time when it's been more difficult to predict where events will go in the Middle East. I mean, with the Israelis, I think they've the last week we've seen them pull rabbits out of the hat. They surprise the world almost on a daily basis, it seems. Meanwhile, the Iranians, usually they're the ones rattling the sabers the loudest. A friend of mine recently made the wry observation that lately it seems like the Iranians have been behaving more responsibly than Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, which, given that the Iranians came to New York and the new president there, Pervez there, he said that Iran wants peace with Israel, and then they offered to go back to the early stages of the nuclear agreement from 2015, right? So clearly, they seem to be looking for a way to de-escalate. Hamas, I think, when you consider the arsenal they have, they could have fired many more rockets and missiles. I mean, we've got the first time now, one disturbing trend, a couple of ballistic missiles fired towards the heart of Israel, which is an escalation, which the Israelis were certainly not let go unanswered. And then meanwhile, Gaza seems to have been pushed almost entirely out of the press coverage, except for maybe the humanitarian aspects there, which are looking dire for the winter. So, it's a really strange brew out there. And for the pundits, it poses a challenge in you could predict the way this is going to go, and you probably got a 50-50 chance of being right or wrong. So, I feel sorry for all the people out there who are, trying to make a living at predicting where this thing is going to go.
Yeah, it has been, as you said, just really difficult to predict anything because all the players in this are not doing what one normally would have expected. And your former job used to be trying to figure out what people were going to do next. In terms of an actual ground invasion, if Netanyahu makes good on that promise that troops are already preparing for something like this, what would that do in terms of opening up the second front in a more official way? Because many people say it's already been opened. But what would a ground invasion look like? What would the impact be in the area? What would you be worried about?
So, I think there's several worries. One here for the Israelis are higher casualties, right? Going into southern Lebanon has never been an easy endeavor, and it's never really worked out that well for the Israelis. Going back to the first incursion was, I think, 78 or something, then 1982, 2006, right? The three. Each time the Israelis, they go in, they kind of achieve what they set out to do, which is to push Hezbollah back, to destroy Hezbollah combat forces. But every time, it causes a lot of pain and heartbreak back in Israel because of the casualties, right? Small country where, relatively what might seem to the West as small numbers of casualties resonate large inside Israel. And remember, the third front, the home front, or the third war, if you will, the internal political war in Israel, is kind of on hold as the Israelis unite to deal with Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, but it's simmering still. So an incursion into southern Lebanon will not just have military ramifications for Israel, there will be political ramifications. And meanwhile, there are signs that Hezbollah, I think there are probably amongst the survivors of the military leadership there, which the Israelis have really put on an intel show, as it were, in taking out Hezbollah military leadership. But I'm sure there's a lot of them that are spoiling for a fight. Right? They look at a ground incursion as the great equalizer between their forces and the Israelis. So, I think while the Lebanese people will be caught in the crossfire and will surely be made to suffer, Hezbollah, I think they welcome an incursion.
I want to get to that incredible sort of pager attack in just a minute and the impact that that had on Hezbollah. But first, I want to stick with Israel for just a moment and ask you, it's said that it's determined to make northern Israel safe enough for the return of some 70,000 Israelis who have been forced from their homes there. Do you believe that the current campaign would be able to accomplish that?
That's another hard one to say. The Israelis have in the past had some success in pushing Hezbollah's combat capabilities back out of range and bringing quiet to the north. I think in this case it's gonna matter just how much combat capability from Hezbollah that the Israelis can exhaust. Whether they can bring peace to the north or not. There's an interesting phenomenon I noticed though in several press pieces that the Netanyahu government, when they were dealing mostly with Gaza, their popularity was declining, right? And there was strife within the government, very public spat between the Minister of Defense and Bibi, Prime Minister Netanyahu. Meanwhile, as Israeli forces take on Hezbollah and fight in the north, the popularity of Likud and Netanyahu has risen, right? So if you look at Bibi as the consummate politician, he's noticed these trends. So for him, pushing hard in the north is paying political dividends for him and his party. So this is, I think, maybe wasn't totally expected, but it does give more impetus for Bibi to push forward with plans to launch an incursion into Lebanon.
Yeah, Israeli officials have really described their strategy, Ralph, as de-escalation through escalation. In other words,
Right.
punish Hezbollah to deter them. Is that likely to work, do you think?
Yeah, this has become another one of those new catchphrases, right? Escalate to de-escalate and escalation dominance, right? I heard a lot of that talk when I was out in the Middle East, and yes and no. Yes, they can achieve de-escalation in the short term, but this is an area where grudges and memories last long, and so the Israelis may be successful in achieving some sort of de-escalation in the short term, but they'll be leaving an enemy that's spoiling for revenge at some point, which means that future escalation would be the norm there. I mean, one thing I think a lot of us learned in the war on terror is you can't kill your way out of a problem, right? Mm-hmm. That's a short-term solution, gives you a tactical advantage, but strategically, you've got to find a way to either vanquish your enemy or find a way to come to some sort of agreement. And I don't see either outcome happening at present.
So let me ask you then, is a ground operation even necessary for Israel to be able to deter Hezbollah and have the impact that it wants to have? Does it need a ground operation?
I don't think they do. And a part of me sees this stuff, like I saw Israeli media coverage of Herzi Halevi, right, the chief of staff out with the troops talking about a ground incursion, preparing them. It almost seemed like a disinformation campaign, if you will, like kind of signaling, like in boxing, you signal with your left and then knock your foe out with the right. And I'm wondering if this is a case where they're just trying to convince Hezbollah that they're coming in a land attack, but they're going to just maybe ramp up the targeting from what has so far been a very successful air campaign, right? Yeah. And in the meantime, like I said, Hezbollah still has a lot of missiles and rockets in their inventory, but the Israelis have shown a remarkable capability to knock them out in flight, right? Like the ballistic missile that was reportedly headed for Mossad headquarters, right? Which I'm sure makes the employees there feel rather jumpy. And then, of course, within minutes, the Israeli Air Force is bombing the locations from where those rockets are fired. So I think Hezbollah, there's a lot of makes a lot of sense for them to be careful what they launch and when.
Mm. Let's talk for a minute about what's happened to the leadership of Hezbollah, especially because of that really kind of unprecedented attack with the batteries that were laden with
Yeah.
explosives. The damage now we've had, a little bit more than a week to kind of assess the actual damage. What do you think in terms of what that actually did to Hezbollah's leadership, and maybe more importantly, the psychological effect of that on Hezbollah leaders?
Yeah, I mean, with the pager attack, that took them completely by surprise. That was as brilliant a supply chain operation as I can think of in my long career. The Israelis are good at that, but in this one, they took it to a whole new level. Not only did they control the supply chain, they controlled the production. Right? If some of the press reporting is to believe, they actually produced the devices. Right? So they didn't just sneak into the supply chain; they took it over. With the radios, I think it was similar, but with the radios, it seems to me like I was kind of confused why they did that, because taking out that type of communications system would be something you do before you invade, before you go on the ground invasion, and they didn't do that. So that tells me that after the pagers went off, the Israelis probably decided, hey, we've got other tricks up our sleeve, but because of the exposure of the pagers, these guys aren't stupid. They're probably going to start ditching everything electronic. So let's set them off now while they can still cause casualties there. So another brilliant operation. And I would say that in neither case would an operation like either one of those be approved by any American government to be used by the American intelligence services. It's just too unpredictable.
You talked about how difficult it is really at the very beginning of our conversation to predict what's going to happen next. But how do you see at least one or two possibilities of the conflict with Hezbollah ending?
Yeah. So one possibility is the two sides gradually reach a point of exhaustion, right, without dealing a knockout punch to either side. I think that's the more likely outcome. The other is, and very unlikely though, is that somehow the world community gets together and puts enough pressure on the Israelis to reach some sort of agreement. I mean, there was a faint ray of hope was given a couple of years ago when Israel and Lebanon worked out a deal for the maritime border for the gas and oil exploitation in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is the first time that Lebanon sort of tacitly recognized Israel, right, and reached an agreement and ratcheted down the tension. So there is precedent there when it comes into each state's interest to find a way out. So at some point, when the people in Lebanon get tired of being bombed out of their houses, and when the people of Israel get tired of living in shelters, and when the fighting forces on both sides get tired of being on full-scale alert, maybe there's a way they can ratchet this thing back.